All right, everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive.
Always ready to dive in.
This time, we're tackling the world of deploying NestJS applications, taking your project from "it works on my machine" to "it's live and serving users."
Yeah, there's a definite art to getting that production set up just right.
So let's say someone's built their awesome NestJS app, feels good about the code.
Yeah.
What's step one, even before they hit that scary deploy button?
Well, first you got to be brutally honest. Is the code really ready for the world? No lingering bugs, performance tuned up, all those dependencies locked down
Well, I
solid.
can feel the anxiety already. I remember
Yeah.
one time I forgot to set up the database connection.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was a mess. So dependencies, database, anything else lurking in that pre-deployment checklist.
You bet. Think about your build process. How's that TypeScript getting transformed into the JavaScript that'll actually run?
Mhm.
Usually there's a build command like nest build, spits out a dist directory with all the goodies.
Right, nest build, so it's just compiling, yeah.
Kind of, but it's more than that. Think bundling dependencies, optimizing the code to run super smooth in production. Got to structure it all just right for the deployment environment, too.
Makes sense. Any gotchas people should watch out for during that build step, things that trip folks up.
Oh, yeah, especially with those TypeScript files. If you've got any hanging out in your project root, not nicely tucked away in their folders, bam, they might end up in the dist directory during the build, and suddenly you've got conflicts or weird errors. Stick to that standard NestJS project structure. It'll save you headaches later.
Good tip. Okay, app's built, we're feeling confident, but where's it going to live? Cloud,
Yeah.
self-hosted server, big decision time.
For sure. Cloud platforms like your AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, they offer that convenience and scalability. They handle a lot of the infrastructure headache for you.
That's tempting, especially if you're not a cloud expert.
Exactly. But then there's self-hosting, more control over your server, maybe even save some money depending on your setup.
More responsibility
Yeah.
too, right?
You got it. More tech expertise needed to get things set up and keep them running smoothly.
So cloud's the easy route. Self-hosting is more DIY. How do people figure out which path is right for them?
Think about your needs. Start up with a small team, need to scale fast, cloud's probably your friend. Got a smaller app, predictable traffic, tighter budget. Maybe self-hosting's worth a look.
So it's like choosing your adventure. Okay, decision made, environment picked, what happens next, any secret handshakes with the server involved.
Uh-huh. Not quite. But there's one thing you gotta do, whether you're on the cloud or self-hosting. Set that NoDNV environment variable to production.
Ah, no DNV production. I've seen that around. Is it really important or just one of those things developers do because it feels official?
It actually changes how things behave. Libraries, frameworks, they might disable all that verbose logging you love in development or some development-specific features, all to make things run faster and more securely in production. Good habit to always set that right.
Right. Makes sense. Get rid of the training wheels once you're on the open road. Right. Apps built, environment's ready, no DNV is set. Time to actually run the thing, right? Just hit it go.
You're getting it. Usually it's a command like nodistmain.js to kick things off, but
Yeah.
gotta pay attention to those pesky ports.
Ports. Oh no, more things to configure.
Just gotta make sure the port your app's listening on matches up perfectly with your server or cloud environment setup. Otherwise, you get those dreaded connectivity issues. And hey, nest start, that command's handy. It builds your app. AND starts it up. Two birds with one stone.
Streamlining. I like it. So double check that port, make sure it's all aligned.
Yeah.
Then what? How do we know our app's not just pretending to be alive out there in the wild?
Health checks. Like a doctor's appointment for your app, making sure its heart's beating strong.
I love that analogy. What kind of checkup are we talking about? What's the app's blood pressure equivalent?
Database connection's a big one. You don't want your app going live only to realize, oops, it can't talk to the database.
Does that?
Right. Also check those API endpoints, make sure external services are happy, keep an eye on how many resources your app's guzzling down, catch those issues early before users start complaining.
Makes sense.
Mhm.
Are there tools to help with this app doctoring?
The @NestJS Terminus package is great for NestJS. It lets you set up all sorts of health checks, super flexible.
Awesome. So we're keeping the app healthy, but how do we actually see what it's doing out there? Like, does it leave little notes for us?
That's where logging comes in. It's your window into the app's soul once it's out there in production. Helps you identify issues, debug problems, see how things are performing.
So it's more than just error messages.
Oh, yeah. You want to log important events, what users are doing, API requests, anything that helps you understand how your app's behaving in the real world.
Okay, so we're logging everything.
Yeah.
But that could be overwhelming, right? A flood of information. Any tips on doing logging right?
Be picky. Only log what's truly meaningful, something you'll actually use later for debugging or analysis. And for the love of all that is holy, protect sensitive data. Never log passwords, API keys, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, those data leaks are scary.
No kidding. Also, use log levels, like a priority system for your messages, errors, get the red alert, info messages are more chill, helps you filter and analyze the logs later.
Smart. So we've got logging levels, we're protecting data. Any other logging power moves we can make?
Consider structured logging. Format those logs as JSON objects makes them super easy to parse and analyze with tools like Elasticsearch or Splunk. And if you're dealing with a big distributed system, correlation IDs are your best friend. Helps you trace requests across all those different services.
Wow, logging can get deep.
It's a whole world, but it's essential for keeping your app running smoothly in production.
I'm starting to realize there's a lot more to deployment than just pushing that button. Any other essential survival tips for the production wilderness?
Absolutely. Let's talk about what happens when your app becomes a huge success. Suddenly, tons of users, traffic spiking, you need to scale, and that's a whole other beast.
Ooh, scaling. Yeah. Sounds intimidating, but also exciting. Guess we'll have to save that for part 2 of this deep dive.
It is intimidating, but you're right, it's also exciting. It means your app is doing well.
That's the dream. But okay, back to reality. What does scaling even mean in practical terms?
Think of it like this. Scaling is all about making sure your application can handle the love, the attention, all those users wanting to use it.
Like making sure the server doesn't just keel over and die.
Exactly. Whether it's a sudden traffic spike or just steady growth, you got to be ready. And there are a couple ways to do it. Vertical scaling.
Vertical, like growing upwards.
Yeah, think of it like giving your server a power boost. More CPU, RAM, storage. Basically beefing up its muscles to handle the heavier lifting.
So same server, just more oomph. When does that make sense?
If your app's traffic is pretty predictable, doesn't need to get huge EE, vertical scaling's a good starting point. It's relatively simple.
Makes sense. But what if you DO need to go big? What's the other option?
That's where horizontal scaling comes in. Instead of one super server, you've got multiple servers all working together, like a team sharing the load.
Okay, so instead of one giant weightlifter, it's a bunch of well-coordinated folks lifting together.
Exactly. Much more flexible and resilient. One server goes down, no problem. The others pick up the slack. And if you're expecting massive growth, unpredictable traffic, horizontal is the way to go.
Sounds more complex, though, managing all those servers.
It is. You've got to think about things like keeping data in sync across them, making sure performance is consistent. But the benefits are huge if you're aiming for that big-time scalability.
All right, so scaling, crucial for success, but got to pick the right approach. What other wisdom do you have for us? Oh, production guru. What else trips people up?
So many things. But one that can't be stressed enough, security. Your app's got to be Fort Knox.
Yeah, security breaches are no joke.
They can be devastating. Input validation, secure authentication, protect against those common web exploits like cross-site scripting, SQL injection. It's a whole topic in itself, really.
We'll have to do another deep dive on that sometime. So, we're secure. What about knowing what's going on once the app's out there? Do we just cross our fingers and hope for the best?
Nope. Gotta have good monitoring in place. It's like the dashboard of your app telling you how it's performing, where the bottlenecks are, alerting you if anything goes wrong.
So we get an email if the server starts sweating.
Pretty much.
Mhm.
You can set up alerts for critical errors, track resource usage, monitor key performance metrics, essential for catching problems before they become disasters.
And I'm guessing backups are important too, just in case.
Oh, absolutely. Think of backups as your time machine, letting you revert back to a known good state if something goes wrong. Whether it's a data corruption, accidental deletion, even a meteor strike on your data center.
Okay, maybe not the meteor strike, but you're right, backups are crucial.
Don't learn that lesson the hard way. And these days, there are so many good solutions. Cloud providers often have integrated backups, or you can use third-party tools to automate the whole process.
Automate everything, that's the goal. Speaking of automation, what about CI/CD? I hear developers throwing that term around like it's magic.
At kind of IS magic, CI/CD stands for continuous integration and continuous delivery. Basically, it's automating the whole process of building, testing, and deploying your application.
So I push some new code and the CI/CD fairy takes care of the rest.
You got it. No more manually deploying every little change. CI/CD pipelines can trigger builds, run tests, and if everything's good, boom, deploy to your chosen environment, all automatically.
That's impressive. Why isn't everyone using this magic?
They should be. It saves so much time and effort, reduces human error, makes deployments way more consistent and reliable. It's a game changer, especially as your app gets more complex.
Okay, I'm sold. CI/CD. Got to look into that. Now let's shift gears a bit. We got to talk about Docker. It's like the cool kid on the block everyone's talking about, but I haven't quite wrapped my head around it.
Docker's pretty awesome. Think of it as a way to package your app and everything it needs to run into a neat little box, like a self-contained environment with the code, the dependencies, the runtime, even the operating system itself.
So it's like a mini virtual machine just for my app.
That's a good analogy. These boxes are called containers. They're super lightweight, portable. You can run them on any machine that has Docker installed, no matter what OS it's running.
That's amazing. Why is everyone so obsessed with Docker then? What's the big deal?
Oh, lots of reasons. First, consistency. Your app runs the same in development, testing, production, no more, but it works on my machine arguments. Second, isolation. Each container is its own little world, so no conflicts between apps or dependencies. And third, scalability. Need more power. Spin up more containers. Easy peasy.
Okay, I'm starting to see the light. But how do I actually create one of these magical Docker containers?
It all starts with a Docker file. It's like a recipe, a set of instructions telling Docker how to build an image, which is like the blueprint for your container.
Docker file. Can you give us a sneak peek at what one of these recipes looks like?
Sure. A simple one for a NestJS app might look something like this. You start with from node.55, specifying the base image. Then workdir app sets the working directory. Then you copy in your package.json and package-lock.json, run npm install to get those dependencies.
Hold on. You're going too fast. Let's break that down a bit. Why node.wheatteam?
That's our base image, the foundation. In this case, we're using a Node.js 18 image because that's what our NestJS app needs to run. It's like we're not starting from scratch, we're building on top of something that already has Node.js set up.
So we're not reinventing the wheel. And then workdir app, that's just saying put everything here.
Yep, that sets the working directory inside our container. It's where we'll put all our apps files.
Makes sense. And why are we copying in the package files first? Why not just copy everything at once?
Good question. We copy the package.json and package-lock.json first, so we can install dependencies before copying the rest of the code. This speeds up the build process, because if the dependencies haven't changed, Docker can reuse the cached layers from previous builds.
So it's like, check if these ingredients are the same. If so, no need to remeasure them.
Exactly, efficiency. Then we copy in the rest of the code using copy-y. After that, we run npm run build to build our NestJS app inside the container. And then expose 3000 tells Docker our app's going to be listening on port 3000.
Not actually opening the port, just letting Docker know.
Right, it's more like documentation, a heads up. And finally, cmd node dismain.js. This is the command that runs when the container starts. It's basically telling the container to execute our NestJS app.
So that Docker file, it's like a little script, a set of instructions that bundles up our app and tells it how to run. Pretty neat.
It is. And once you have it, you can use Docker build to create an image from it, and then Docker run to launch a container based on that image.
Lots of Dockering going on. Sounds powerful, though, all this containerization.
It is. Makes deployments so much smoother, more portable. And there are even more cool tricks, like using a Docker ignore file.
What's that do?
It tells Docker which files to ignore when building the image. Like, you probably don't want your node modules folder in there since the dependencies will be installed inside the container anyway. Keeps your image smaller, faster to build.
Efficiency tips, always appreciate those. What about sharing these Docker images? Can you put them online somewhere?
You bet. Docker registries, they're like repositories for Docker images. Docker Hub is a popular one, but you've also got private registries like AWS ECR, Google Container Registry. Push your image up there, and anyone with access can pull it down and run it.
So build once, deploy anywhere. That's the dream.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And if you're deploying to the cloud, AWS, Azure, etc., they have services that make managing and scaling those Docker containers even easier.
This is blowing my mind a little bit. So much to learn.
It's a lot, but it's worth it. Docker can really level up your deployment game.
I'm convinced. Now, there's one more thing I got to ask about. I keep hearing whispers of a platform called MAU, specifically for deploying NestJS apps on AWS. Is this a real thing or just a mythical beast?
MAU's real, and it's pretty awesome. It's an official platform designed to make deploying NestJS to AWS a breeze.
Like, take away all the AWS headaches.
Exactly. MAU handles so much of the heavy lifting. provisioning databases, setting up those broker services, scheduling cron jobs, even creating CI/CD pipelines. It's your one-stop shop for NestJS on AWS.
Sounds almost too good to be true. Can you give an example? Like, how does it make things easier, concretely?
Imagine you need a database for your app. With MAU, you don't have to mess around with all the AWS services to set one up. You just say, hey, MAU, I need a database, this type, please, and it takes care of the rest.
No more clicking through a million AWS menus. I'm liking this already.
It's a lifesaver. And deploying the app itself, super simple. Connect your Git repo to MAU, and every time you push new code, it automatically builds and deploys it.
Git integration, automatic deployments. It's like all my deployment dreams are coming true. What about cron jobs, background tasks, that kind of stuff?
MAU's got you covered. Schedule cron jobs, define background workers, even deploy serverless functions using AWS Lambda.
Okay, Mao officially sounds like magic. I'm definitely checking it out. Any Mao-specific tips?
Honestly, it's incredibly user-friendly. Their interface is clean. The docs are great. They've really focused on making it easy to get started.
That's music to my ears. I'm sold.
All right. I think we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive, from build processes to cloud versus self-hosting, Docker, CI/CD, even MAU. My brain's a little full, but in a good way.
It's a lot to take in, but hopefully you're feeling more prepared, more confident about taking your NestJS apps to production.
I definitely am. But like you said earlier, there's always more to learn. Any parting wisdom for our listeners before we wrap this up? It feels like we've only scratched the surface.
Right. Deployment's a huge topic. We could talk about it for days. Maybe we should do a follow-up episode sometime. But for now, any final nuggets of wisdom, things you wish you'd known when you started out with all this?
I guess my biggest piece of advice would be don't be afraid to experiment. Deployment's always evolving, new tools, new techniques.
So stay curious, keep learning.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to try things, break things, learn from those mistakes. That's how you really master this stuff.
Love that. Embrace the chaos.
Hmm.
All right, I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on today. Any final thoughts before we wrap up this deep dive?
Just remember, deployment, it's not just about servers and code. It's about taking that amazing app you've built and sharing it with the world. It's about making a difference.
Well said. So to all the listeners out there, go forth and deploy with confidence. We believe in you.
You got this.
And if you want to dive even deeper, we've got tons of links and resources in the show notes, even a bonus tip or two that we didn't have time to cover today.
Happy deploying.
And until next time, happy coding, everyone.